You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast.
Where were you when Shigaraki appeared for the first time? We're going to be discussing that today on our episode of Systematic Geekology. We are the Priests of the Geeks. We'll be covering the Battle Trial and USJ arcs for My Hero Academia. I believe this is the third episode we've done. And I have, of course, Christian Ashley, and I am joined by one of the best co-hosts ever available to the world. That's not TJ, but you know what? He's still pretty dang good. Nick, how you doing, Nick?
I'm good. If I can even be mentioned in proximity to TJ, I'm feeling pretty solid.
That's always real solid, isn't it? It's like,
it really is.
I could just have a tenth of his power.
He's like Shaggy in that way.
I would hate to see TJ go Ultra Instinct on anyone.
So true.
Using 1% of his power. All right. So, guys, as we established before, we're doing My Hero. But before we get into that, Nick, what have you been geeking out on recently?
So recently, I have been revisiting The Mandalorian Season 3. I'm writing a Tolkien Pop article on Mandalorian and, of course, The Lord of the Rings. And so I've just been going through. And it's just such a good season, man. It's been super fun to revisit it.
Perfect. Let's see. I started because I have never once seen it before. I'm a big horror guy, and I've never seen Tales from the Crypt. So I've started watching. I've seen the two movies they did, but I have not seen the actual show. So I finished the first season, and I think there's 6 more after that. So really fun. Not for the faint of heart, not for children by any stretch of the imagination, but still a really good time.
Is that the one with the Crypt Keeper? Like that introduces
Absolutely,
stuff?
yes.
Yeah, let's go. That's awesome.
All right. So like we said before, we're doing the Battle Trial and USJ arcs for My Hero Academia. So Nick, why don't we collab on this one and give a brief overview of what happens here?
Okay. I'm going to give you the Battle Trial one, if you would be so kind.
Yeah, sure thing. So after what happened last time, our group, they get their new hero costumes. We see all the flamboyant nature of some of them, more of the more simplistic styles some people have. When you have Deku, and it's obvious, like I'm trying to emulate All Might, but he looks like a bunny.
Yeah, and he's got the smile, and like everyone's like, they like do the classic Japanese like embarrassed falling over thing where they're like, cringe.
Oh yeah, and some of them, like I really like most of their costumes. I mean, I'm sure there's how many members of the Class 1A? I'm going to forget someone that I don't really care for as much.
Yeah.
But most of them are like, yeah, I like these a lot.
Same.
Then we get All Might coming in as their instructor for this, saying, okay, this is part of your training. We're doing an exercise where 2 of you are going to be acting like villains, and then 2 of you are going to be our heroes in this situation. They've got a nuclear weapon, hidden in this abandoned facility here. You're going to have to come in there, and the hero's goal is to stop them from using it, and the villain's goal is to beat the heroes. So kind of teaching them both sides of the fence, which is really useful, I would think.
Yeah.
Getting into someone else's headspace, especially at such a young age too, because you're not really encouraged a lot by people to like understand someone else sometimes as much as we should.
Yeah, I really like who's the one who embodies the villain? Is it
Tenya? Ida.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Ida.
Mango's method actor.
He really does.
Oh, yeah. So we start, of course, because how could it not happen any other way, with Izuku and Bakugo facing off, with Bakugo being teamed up with Ida and Ochako being teamed up with Izuku. And it's at this point in time, like the confrontation's been built up. Bakugo's upset because Izuku, Deku, just gained powers out of nowhere, his quirk from nowhere. And he's very upset because he's always been number one. And this guy who used to look up to him has now have power that may exceed his own. And of course, what does he do? He denies strategy and he goes straight for him.
Man, he does. And it ends up costing him too. And I think that Izuku like pins him down by, doesn't he use one of his own, like uses Bakugo's own methods or something like that, and doesn't even use his quirk at first?
Yeah. Which, just to rub the salt in a little further there in that scenario, like because he can't rely on One for All just yet without like damaging himself. So he has to be quick on his feet. How can I stop this scenario without breaking my fingers and arms? And he uses Bakugo's techniques against him, which of course infuriates him even more.
Yeah.
And almost causes the fake bomb to go off to an extent. Because, of course, you have the explosion quirk, villain in this scenario with a bomb. It's a very bad situation.
Right.
But in the midst of this, they're able to use Izuku and Uraraka are able to like strategize together. They know Bakugo is going to like flip off the handle and leave Ida behind. So they use that to their advantage and they're able to get to the bomb. But once again, a lot of things start to break.
Right.
So we do get some, which I also thought was really useful from a character perspective, like a rundown of, okay, what did they do right? What did they do wrong?
Yeah.
So they could have just rushed it, but they have other characters speaking out. Of course, Momo being the one to speak up first. And she lists off a lot of stuff we were talking about earlier. Bakugo was too reckless. Like, yeah, sure, Izuku and Uraraka won, but like the building was destroyed and they're heroes. They're not supposed to happen.
Right.
And she praises Ida as like the only person who did things correctly.
Which is just classic Ida.
Oh, yes. And it's at this point, Deku, at one point, he has to use One for All. So he ends up in the nurse's office again. Oh, wait, no. Is this when we meet Recovery Girl for the first time? I can't remember.
I'm trying to think, because when did we meet her when they do the trials? When he like, because he uses like he uses his leg and his arm for the trials. Yeah. And I don't remember if Recovery Girl is there or if, like you said, it's in this episode.
Yes, she definitely is in the entrance exam. That's when we first meet her, is when she's treating him after the fact.
Okay.
So she knows about All Might's stuff because obviously she'd be like the one person to be able to reverse it, but didn't work. So, of course, we see a very upset Bakugo after this, and Izuku kind of has that moment of like owning up to what he did, but like he can't quite get the words out just yet.
Yeah.
And we last see a mysterious person who we'll talk about in a minute reading a newspaper about All Might becoming a teacher. And that is where the battle trial arc goes from there. There's a couple other things, but they're smaller.
Yeah.
Take it away.
So, we are doing the battle trial. Okay, so at this point, they go to the rescue dome, and throughout the, throughout the series, we get more glimpse into the League of Villains. We get to see some of the backgrounds. Mm-hmm. It's kind of mysterious. We know that there's a plan that's happening behind closed doors. We don't know exactly what's happening as far as who's connected to, as far as their plans, but we know that it goes bigger than just the League of Villains. And towards the end, I don't remember, do they talk about Nomu in their plans, or do we not learn about Nomu until they actually, all the villains actually get teleported into the USJ?
A good question. I can't remember if they like mention it offhand, but like we obviously don't have the context for it.
Yeah.
And then the Nobu appears.
Right.
Yeah. I'd have to rewatch it. It's been quite some time.
Me too. I think I want to say this is what I'll go, and listeners, if you're here, correct us. But please. I think from what I want to go with that they definitely do bring up Nomus, and it's one of those things where you're like, what are Nomus? What is this? Or they at least hint at some type of secret weapon or something. And so all the students end up going to the USJ, and they have to rescue a bunch of people from different stuff. And then, of course, villains come and are teleported. And everyone's like, how did people know where these students were? Because UA is usually super secret. And so there might be a mole amongst the group now that ends up being a thing. And so there are hundreds? I don't know. Hundreds might be too much. Maybe like 150, 200 villains, something like that. There's a lot of villains to like a very small group of heroes in training, and then even fewer amounts of professional heroes. And everyone ends up getting split up, and each different hero or student in training is tested with teamwork and rescuing people, and also learning their abilities. And a Nomu shows up, and we get to see All Might just go freaking ham. And I think that I remember that moment was the moment where I was like, I already like the show, but I was like, I'm sold. This is sick. Like All Might going full blast, war what seems to be full blast. We learn later that it's not. But yeah, so then we learn later after the aftermath, the villains are defeated, and everyone's trying to figure out like, how are these villains? How do they know this? And what is going to happen next with the safety of the students? And then the League of Villains. Who are the League of Villains?
Yeah, I think this is a very good setup for them too. And you got to have, with the hero story, you've got to have your villains.
Right.
And like this attack out of nowhere, like how do they know they were there? This en masse like group collective of, are these people all working together? Or do they just bring a bunch of scrubs to be like, waves upon waves to overwhelm them? And there's actually a few people who actually know why they're here. Yeah. And that mystery building up is like, okay, what's going on here? I mean, especially when the Nomu is brought in, it's like, oh, this is brought specifically for All Might.
Right.
Someone here has a grudge.
Yeah. And so, and because like you said, the waves of villains at first, like these UA students can handle a bunch of them at the same time. So most of the villains are, like you said, just pure scrubs that are just used to waves to distract people, or at least pave the way for the coming of the Nomu to, kill All Might. And of course we get, Eraserhead really shows up here, and Eraserhead
Very
ends up being so cool. And I think even Shigaraki says that, where he thinks that he's the Nomu has smashed Mr. Aizawa, and he's like, oh, psych. Eraserhead's way cooler than that.
Oh yes, it definitely, like we've gotten to know him a little bit over time. He's this very grumpy guy who is very serious about what he does, but like to actually see him in action against someone he can't possibly beat.
Right.
And like he does it anyway because the students are in danger. And
he holds his own until the Nomu shows up.
Against someone who can literally disintegrate you with a touch.
Right. And
yeah, that earns respect right there. And that's exactly what you mentioned. Shigaraki's like, man, you're pretty dang cool. It's like, well, of course he is. Like, how many other people are willing to do that?
And we obviously will get, but that's just Eraserhead throughout the entire series, who just continues to prove himself to be even cooler and more of a hero with each arc. I think that's one of the moments that stands out. I love Eraserhead, and this arc is part of the start of that for sure, as far as like a true love, rather than just he's sarcastic and lazy and kind of fun in that way. Yeah, but yeah, this is as a hero, yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, we mentioned these two arcs. Is there one you prefer over the other?
Both of them are good. Like you said, we get with the battle trials, we get to see like how UA functions. We get to see how All Might is tutoring the students and specifically interacts with Midoriya, and we get to see character development. But my favorite's the USJ, specifically for the ending moments where we get to see the UA actually be thrust into the situation where it's no longer training. This is real, and they don't hold back. And then of course we get to see Eraserhead and All Might in their fullness for the first time. Yeah.
Both of these are really fun arcs. I like the character studies done in both of them. I think Battle Trial does a little more, but what we get to see in USJ is the other students, like in the midst of the moment, the heat of battle, what can they do? Who are they actually?
Yeah.
And we get to see, what is it, Momo and Kaminari and Jiro like working together there. We get to see Todoroki solo everyone around him,
right?
with just his ice powers. Let me see Kirishima and Bakugo like start to become friends, at least on one side at the very beginning, and then later on they become friends.
Yes.
And then of course we knew about Mineta and Tsuyu, but then we actually see them in action working with Deku. It's like, yes, this is perfect there, but forget the students. We also get to see All Might in action.
Yes.
And him coming up against like the question I'm about to ask about standout moments and characters. It's going to be him realizing the Nomu has a energy absorption quirk.
Yeah.
Not an energy nullification quirk. There's a big difference between the two.
Right.
And like, see, he's not just a dumb brute who just smashes things. Like there's a mind in there. There's tactics he uses. Not that we thought he was dumb by any stretch of the imagination, but actually see that happen, to be shown that was a lot better. So I've already said it. Like, are there any standout moments or characters you want to discuss further?
I think I think just to piggyback and just focus on that, All Might, like just getting even more insight to like, there's a reason why he's number one, and has remained number one for as long as he has, basically he became basically the sole protector of Japan, essentially, which is just mind blowing.
And in light of revelations that happen later on, like, could you imagine, without spoiling, if he had gained what Deku gets along the way and he was already number one?
He'd be like unstoppable. He'd probably be number one hero in the entire world, honestly.
Oh, yes. But that also comes at a price, too.
Yeah,
because, it's true. It's stuff that gets established later on. We get bits and pieces of it at the very start of people depending on him as a symbol of peace rather than doing anything themselves. Because, All Might will just take care of it. And we'll get to that question in a little bit. But yeah, anything else you want to say about that scene?
No, what about you?
Okay, so besides that, and besides the Razorhead up against Shigaraki, like holding his own for a bit, there's a brief moment again in the prior arc where we see Todoroki and the heroes versus villains soloing everything again. And it starts to build up his character of a very, prideful to an extent, but like, because he's actually able to do what he says.
Yeah.
And then we get it again in this one of him just taking care of people. Just swiftly, without any resistance on their part. Like, he's a one-man army. It's the building up to what happens in the sports festival relies on scenes like this where, oh my gosh, I can't imagine Deku taking him on one-on-one at this point in time. He's going to lose. He's going to die.
Right.
Especially, he's still only using half of his quirk.
Yeah.
So that's super important. I really enjoyed that. Let's see. A bit of a smaller moment. Like right before this, we had the class president, like everyone was voting and they vote for popularity first. And I think it's like Momo and Deku, and Ida's upset, but then he takes charge in an emergency situation. In classical Ida goofy way that actually helps people. And then that earns everyone's respect for him in the class and they vote him to be president instead. I enjoy that. It's a smaller character moment, but well worth it.
Well, and like you said, it sets up all the pieces for everybody in the important moments, and even just like Ida and how respectable he really becomes, and the amount of respect that he commands from the rest of his class. Like you said, stems from his goofiness, but then it just develops into something that's just so awesome.
Oh, very much so. All right, so let's get into more quality content. And by quality content, I mean sexual harassment. Yeah, I don't want to shirk over this. It's something that bothers me. Is what we mentioned in the overview episode. Like, I don't think any of us really like Mineta that much.
Yeah.
Okay. So twice here in both of these arcs, and I think there's maybe even 3 times, we see him sexually harassing one of his fellow students. Once in the Battle Trial arc, where he spends his time just leering at Momo's body, which, to be fair, if I was a teenager, I understand. But there's a limit.
Right.
Yeah. And then the second time when he full-on gropes Suyu during the attack on the USJ. Now, obviously, this is not intended, and it's very poorly, in my opinion. This is intended to be comedy.
Yeah.
And if this were real world, something would be done about something like this, hopefully, if you have a good school.
Right.
But what does it say about like what the author thinks about his intended audience, which for shonen, for those who are unaware, it's typically young boys to teens. I mean, girls every now and then are starting to gain more of a fandom, but primarily they're focusing on boys and young guys.
Right.
Like, what does it say about what he thinks of them, that something like this can happen in a story and not be handled appropriately? Or am I making something out of nothing?
No, I think there is something there. I mean, even going back with Shonen Jump in particular, and then of course I'm going through Dragon Ball again, and I'm classic Master Roshi, but the beginning when Krillin and Goku are trying to earn Master Roshi's tutelage, and of course it's just centered around perversion, pornography, and all kinds of stuff. And of course, Master Roshi, you see him at cons, and when people do Master Roshi, genuinely hilarious. As far as the way in which Master Roshi postures himself towards the women in the series, not great. And I wouldn't put Mineta as far as Master Roshi. I think there has been some development in the past 30, 40 years,
Yes.
But I think there is still an assumption, which I think happens here in our own culture too, that there's this kind of boys will be boys type of a thing. And I think it's taken a little too far.
Yeah. And once again, like, if I was a teenage boy in that class, god dang, would I be in trouble?
Right.
You know what? Because there are pretty beautiful women in there, beautiful young girls. I mean, like, I'm an adult. That's a little creepy now. I don't want to get into that. But like, if I was in that moment right there as a teenager, and the costumes are what they are, they're very form fitting, especially like, I mean, just Momo alone. Where do you think my eyes are going to wander? Because I'm a teenage boy. Like, that part I get completely. I mean, fan service is one of those things in anime, ecchi, kind of irks me when it's done too much.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think it's done a little too much here. But like, I'm not against the idea of it, because once again, I know who the intended audience is. It's not me, the 32-year-old man. It's the guy who's half my age, who is learning about those things for the first time and is very interested. So of course that's going to titillate them, not to use that as a pun. But go ahead.
Yeah, well done. I think also those type of things can be also comments on things that are negative. So obviously Mineta is utilized as comedy as well, but I think there is also some commentary on perverted people like Mineta, because he's not liked. Everybody in the class pretty much hates him, except when he like develops as a hero or whatever.
And he does get better.
He does. And I think that says something too. I think the thing that I think about is like when I grew up in youth group, and when you have like the youth pastor do the sex series, and he's like, stop thinking about sex, stop thinking about sex, stop thinking about sex. And you're like, I wasn't, and now all I can think about is sex.
You put it in my head.
Right. I feel like that's kind of what's happening a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I understand that completely. Thank God I had some pretty good teachers growing up that weren't very, they weren't direct like that. They were like, hey, this is a natural thing. Your mind's going to wander, but you're better than that. You need to move on. Like, okay, that's a better way to teach that. But yeah, your comment earlier about boys will be boys. Like, well, there's a way that should be taken, which is, a couple of guys said, hey, what if we tried to stack on top of each other and see if we could get that branch off that tree?
Sure.
It's stupid. It's stupid to do that. Boys will be boys. And then there's let's flip someone's skirt, or let's, grope someone. It's like, oh, well, boys will be boys. No. And they merged the two, thinking, oh, well, it's natural for them to think that, which, yeah, it's natural. It doesn't mean it's good for you to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, we've all have the internal thoughts. Like you said, whether it's negative thoughts towards another person, or we've all said that, like, oh, if that person came across, I'd punch him in the face. We obviously wouldn't do that, and we don't put punching somebody we don't like into the category of what boys should be like. And like you said, that's your point. Sexual assault is not something that should be equated with what the ideal version of a man or a woman should look like.
And you get to feel too, Japan, especially after World War II, even before that, was fairly conservative. But then you get more American values instilled as, we're rebuilding the country with them after very, let's say, testy 2 decisions we made at the end of the war there. So that's something for a different podcast to discuss. But some of the values we have here that come from Christian ideas were placed there, and they became, even compared to us, like ultra conservative. And part of what happens in, reading materials like this for manga and anime is you would have people testing the waters, and like, can I dip my toe here? And I show, a woman in this situation or a guy in this situation. Are the censors going to say anything?
Yeah.
And then it just kept going and going to where it just became part of the genre.
Right.
And to the point, in my opinion, where it's done poorly most of the time.
Yeah.
And because I've heard conflicting stories. I don't know if this is true, so disregard this if it isn't. I've heard people say that Horikoshi, the mangaka, the writer of My Hero Academia, for those that don't know, likes Mineta a lot. And I've heard people say that he doesn't. Depending on which one, depends on how I'm going to view Mineta.
Yeah.
And if he's like, oh, that pervy little boy, I wish I was doing what he was, we have some issues.
Right.
If it's, oh, this idiot, it's part of the genre, I'll stick it in, and some people will laugh, like, okay, it's not the best decision you could have made, but I'll deal with it.
Yeah. I think we can say that Mineta, least likable character, making some progress. Hope to see Mineta be a more mature, kind-hearted,
Yes. It's going to be a long journey, people. But I promise that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Anything else you want to add to that, Nick?
I don't think so. Just that, stay Master Roshi's and stay away from Minetas and Master Roshi's.
Yeah. Be with a teacher like Master Roshi who inspires you to do really good things. Don't be like the moral character of Master Roshi.
Well done. Well done.
Yeah. I think we'll drop the mic there. So moving on, we discussed it before. One of the things that happens in the USJ arc is a bunch of adults, supervillains, come in, start attacking a bunch of kids. So as we learn more about the League of supervillains and all this, it's like part of their stuff is that they want to change society.
Yeah.
They want people who are weirder and outcasts to be seen as, as normal as everyone else, which noble goal. But what does it say about someone's ideology, like to change things in society, if they're willing to target children, keeping in mind that one day these same children will grow up to be the very heroes they were going to end up fighting anyways?
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that there's just so much that My Hero Academia has to offer as far as just having big questions like that. Because UA and hero culture is kind of like the main way that society is maintained or changed throughout My Hero Academia. But I feel like it kind of represents, like, if you want to change society or the future, you have to do so through the influence of children, right? And I think that the League of Villains is like this. There's this violent targeting within a superhero show that I think that in particular in society that, like, okay, we all want to, there's a difference between having ideas and wanting to teach our children or getting the opportunity to positively influence children, at least what we believe is positive influence. And actually there's a difference between that and then embodying an agenda to then target children to try to shape them into something, treating them as a means to an end. And I think that there's something similar going on in My Hero Academia. I don't know if you think I'm totally off base or...
Nah, I see your point. It's this, there's going to be a new generation that comes out after everything. They're in training for a society that's already in existence that favors some over others. Now, those aren't why their kids aren't there to preserve that facet of that society. But at the end of the day, they're still working with it.
Yeah.
So you see someone have a point of, oh, well, they're targets too, because they're going to end up in the same way. Like, did you ever watch DBZA, Dragon Ball Abridged?
I did. It's been such a long time.
But there's a Frieza line there I had to look up. It's him and Goku talking, and Goku says, anyone who murders children would be monsters, what Goku says, to the effect of, and Frieza says, oh, please, everyone's always on about the children. I already tried leaving them alive, but all they do is grow up under my rule or dedicate their pathetic lives to revenge, usually both. Really, killing them is a kindness. I can retract this kindness if you wish, but then who's the villain? Then we get the good back and forth there if it's you, but yeah, the point being, you get the point Frieza is making there.
Yeah.
But it's so monstrous. Like, that's what Shigaraki and the League of Villains end up doing in this regard. It's like, you can't combat someone who's about to become a combatant.
Yeah.
Because they're not a combatant yet.
Right.
So it's the same thing like not targeting a medic to an extent. Like, a medic should never be the one picking up a gun.
Right.
Except unless it's for self-defense, I believe is what part of the Geneva Convention is staged around. I think that's the only way that a medic can pick up a gun.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to re-look that up. But it's the same sense for these kids. Like, sure, they're a part of the thing you're trying to change, but that's not their fault.
Right.
Like, there are better ways of going about this. Like, as we get more into the series, we're learning about heteromorphs and other people as well who just look weird, or someone like Toga, who can't fit into society because she has this instilled need in her mind. She can't shake that she has to go after blood.
Yeah.
And you get, oh, I perfectly see where you're coming from. Like, you deserve to live too, but how do we fit you into society we already have? Well, if you don't agree with us, you're gone, is what the current MHA society says.
Right. That's really cool about this show too, is that like that's kind of all of the villain origin stories, right? Is that they grow up and they are rejected by society from people who are just careless, right? Kind of similar to what a lot of, or I think the relatable experience to the everyday person is that we've all felt like outcasts to a certain extent, larger degrees than others, and those are usually those negative moments that end sometimes, become our villain origin story. Like you said, how do you change that? Because I think there is, the villains have a point, right? Throughout the series, you empathize with the villains to a large degree, in many cases. But then when, like you said, they attack high school children, then you're like, this is kind of whack.
Yeah. It's not an easy question to answer, other than the fact that obviously children should never be the target of your desire to change society.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's something we'll explore later on, because there'll be plenty of opportunities as we continue our series on My Hero Academia. You have anything else you want to add to that, Nick?
No, I don't think so. We'd be here forever talking about that one thing. That's a fun one.
Especially, we can't really keep going without spoiling more. I think I've already said too much to begin with. So
right.
Let's just go to the next question. So we see part of the reason, like, All Might gets there later, which, as someone who's a big fan of the big dang heroes trope, I love that moment in a comic or a movie or what have you, when it all seems lost and then boom, out of the sky or crashing through the windows, the hero shows up. All Might shows up to save the day. Like, nothing gets me more hype in that moment than like, everything was lost. No, it's not. So like, part of the reason he got there late is because he's continuing to hero and look out for people, despite the fact that we know at this point in time he can't stay in his muscle form for a long time. Is it after this arc that it's only like 5 minutes at a time, or is that later on?
No, it's after this one. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it's undefined at this point, I'm pretty sure, but enough to know, oh, you shouldn't be doing this all the time. So because of this, he's not nearly as able as he normally would be to fight Shigaraki and the Nomu and protect the kids at the same time. Like, do you think his desire to help other people, knowing what it's going to cost him, is this a negative part of this personality, or something to be commended about him?
It's complex, because I think there's something about I think the show is pointing to this throughout the series. There's like an innocence and like naivete behind it. And I think it's for All Might's abilities and intentions as well as society's, because once All Might, spoiler alert for folks, but he eventually cannot transform anymore. Like, society starts collapsing. And I think that's something that the show's doing, is that these are limited beings, and the whole, like, there's no such thing as like human or mortal omnipotence, right? That does not exist. The only way for things to move forward in society is through friendship and cooperation. And I think that that's part of the stuff that it's critiquing with All Might. And that's his flaw. His biggest strength is his biggest flaw, right? Because once he gives into his hero and he's like, I have this responsibility to carry the whole weight of the country on my shoulders, that's when people get hurt. He eventually comes to save the day, but like you said, it was unnecessary, you could argue.
Well, even more, if I remember correctly, one of the villains he fought in that time was someone who was being fought by, I think, Mount Lady and Kamui Woods at the same time.
Yes.
And like, they could have handled it themselves, but he was quicker to do it. But if he hadn't have intervened, it would have ended the same way. It just would have taken a little longer.
Right.
And there's that whole point of everyone's relying on him. Well, you're actively doing that if you don't let other people work on their own. If, that's part of what he has to learn as a teacher too along the series, as like, he doesn't know how, number one, because he's just like, he gets things like, how does he teach Deku to use one for all? Like, well, you just should.
Yeah.
That's not his fault, because he just inherently got it. But it's a flaw of his character, that whole Like, I'm someone with the power to do it, therefore I should. And Horikoshi's the big Spider-Man guy. If you haven't figured out that in the series, like, it's obvious all over the place. He loves Spider-Man. Certain developments as well kind of look like some webs or symbiote tendrils. We'll get to
Absolutely.
that later on. Yeah. But part of Spider-Man's big mythos, as his number one fan here, is, with great power must come great responsibility. And that's been worded like 50 different ways, but you all get the premise of All Might has this great power. And that great responsibility to help other people is something that drives him, but he takes it too far. But at the same time, if he can help and he doesn't, is he using his power responsibly? So you got to wrestle that with everything in there. And I get why. I just think he's being short-sighted.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, it's not something that you're like bad All Might for trying to help everybody, but it is one of those things where you're like the struggle between, like I said, especially like particularly with Spider-Man, but I think spills out into most superhero series is that how much of a hero can you be with the limitations that you have?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite storylines in Spider-Man, not to get way too off track, is when he gains the power of Captain Universe, which in the Marvel mythos is like one of the greatest power sets you could ever have. And Spider-Man starts doing things like he punches the Hulk in the orbit, and he starts taking down like Magneto and a bunch of villains he has no business beating because he has the powers of the Unipower. And there's a what if issue where he keeps those powers because in the end of the storyline, he loses them after like defeating the Tri-Sentinel. But the what if issue focuses on him losing parts of his humanity along the way because his desires to help people. But we get this point where he and Thor are in Africa, and it's like, okay, Thor, you make water for this, arid region here, and that way people will have land and crops and all this stuff. And Thor's like, no, that's not our job.
Yeah.
And does that miss that distinction of, well, how far can you go with that great power and responsibility?
So good. Because like you said, even with All Might in the future, we get to see some of that reclamation or realization of human aspects. Man, yeah, that's so good, dude. So good. Oh, yeah.
Anything else you want to add to this part?
No, man, I think the Spider-Man point with the Unipower was a great bow.
Oh, yeah. I can't remember what if issue that was. It was the second volume. It's what if Spider-Man never lost the powers of Captain Universe or something like that. All right. So in regards to My Hero Academia, the actual point of discussion here, is there anything you want to add about these two arcs?
I think just that we get to see the trajectory of each of the heroes in 1A. And obviously that's what the show is centered around. But I almost think that, I don't know the right word for it, but this is kind of the linchpin. I feel like these two arcs into or if you want to say the transition two arcs into from complete novices to heroes, and you really get the meat of it. And I think you talked about like character explorations. Like some people call those episodes slow or something sometimes, or that's filler. And I'm a big DBZ guy, and I've gone through and there's lots. Yeah, you've seen filler. There's some real filler in there, but like there are some really slow arcs that do a lot of character exploration, and that's the moments that come in, the big moments, like you said, when a hero comes and saves the day, especially when you spent that much time with them and seeing where they were before. Like it just makes the payoff so much better, and you can't have the payoff without arcs like the ones that we've talked about.
Oh yeah, well, imagine later on, we get Bakugo winding down a bit without having arcs like this where we see him at his worst.
Yeah.
Like, there's no payoff at the end of the day. It's like, well, you just decided to be good.
Right.
Or as good as you're going to get.
Right. We all know the quick transformations that make things bad. Like, the last season of the Game of Thrones TV series with, that's an easy target. But to Daenerys Targaryen quickly turning evil and psycho, and you're just like, what? But then you also, we've got it here, but then really good ones like Zuko and Avatar, right? His victory and power increase.
Burn. Oh, worth it.
Yes.
Yeah, I just think people just have patience these days. And
yeah.
That's something we all need to learn to be better at.
Yeah. Be like Christian and I, okay?
There you go. All right. So there's your lesson for today. Be like Nick and I.
Yes.
In light of that, though, how would you rate and review these two arcs? You can do them separately or together. Your choice.
I think I'll do separate. I think that the battle trial gets a solid 7.
Okay.
And I think it's just a little slow for me, but in a good ways. And I just talked about how I like those episodes that develop, but I like episodes with payoff more. So with all the moments with Eraserhead and All Might and all of the heroes actually putting like their potential into real life action, I'm going to give it like a 9 for the USJ arc.
Yeah, I agree with that. The slow but necessary would be battle trial arc. And I'll give it probably like an 8 for mostly the same reasons of the character exploration and getting some time to understand some of the quirks we have here, having Izuku and Ochako like teaming up together for the first time, really outside of the exam at the beginning. And that was only really briefly. And then him like taking his name for the first time as Deku.
Yeah,
we'll get to that,
I forgot about that.
If you would like. And for anyone who wants to go to Captivate or Apple Podcasts and send us a little extra cash, you can hear that question we're going to ask as soon as we're done recording this. But as far as the USJ is concerned, after that shameless plug, I'll give it like maybe a 9.5, probably a 9.5. If I'm being honest, like I love moments like that. Like the rising action is there. Yeah, everything seems hopeless. No, it's not. Your hero shows up, All Might shows up, and even then we have this moment of weakness in him where he's protected by the other teachers from having his secret found out.
Yeah.
But it's just enough to get things done.
Yeah. I'm going to boost my to a 9.5 too. It's that good. It's that good.
Good to hear. All right. So guys, thank you for listening to this episode. I can't believe we're going to keep doing this. I gave this idea to Joshua like forever ago as like poking and see. You don't really do this. You just like cover one series and like there's so much that happens in one series. You can't just have one episode on it.
Yeah.
And yet he said yes to me. And now this is what's happening. And I can't be more happy. So we get to keep doing this.
Christian is a podcast god among men.
So do you have a recommendation you want to leave to the audience before we start with everything else in a wrap up?
You know, I think I'm just going to recommend just because I've kind of been reading and watching and playing some of the same stuff over the past month that I have, and as far as recommendations. But if you haven't read any of the Lord of the Rings, you should go.
Highly underrated. Never talked about.
Never talked about.
Nick has never seen it before now.
Never. Yeah, but you
never read it.
You need to go read it immediately.
What's the Silmarillion? He doesn't know.
Yeah, I mean, what? I don't know.
Excellent choice. I'm going to stick with the superhero theme, and I'm going to pick the first season of Invincible, which was
so good.
Amazing and well worth it. I still need to read the comics, but the second season is coming out fairly soon, so that's why I'm really putting that down as my recommendation. If you haven't gotten into that yet, it's 8 episodes. Well worth all your times. Superhero action, a deconstruction of the franchise while also being a reconstruction at the same time.
Yes.
Not being needlessly depressing as something like The Boys, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But that's that. I'll keep that away. I won't be on The Boys episode anytime soon. I'll put it that way. So guys, thanks for listening. I had a fun time doing this. We're going to keep doing it, bringing some more My Hero your way at least once a month from what I understand. If you have a chance, leave us a 5-star review on your podcasting platform of choice. Head over to our YouTube page and subscribe. We've got some really fun videos out there. We've got our Drinks with Tejas. We've got our What's New episodes. We've got the Friday Night Frights I just did on the Loch Ness Monster, and the Wednesday Night Weeaboo about the anime I've been watching for this current season. I'm about to do that on Wednesday. It's a ton of fun. But please remember, before all this, we're all a chosen people, a geekdom of priests.
This was an Anazao Ministries podcast. If you enjoyed this show and would like to learn more about our network, be sure to check out the Anazao Ministries Podcast Network.